She graduated from the police academy in 1983 and was assigned to the Hollywood division. She was twice named Detective of the Year. She was promoted to a supervisory position and was described as an upstanding, outstanding police officer who always followed the rules and always played by the book. She even raised money to open a 24-hour child care service for members of the LAPD. She went on to work on internal affairs, which investigates sorry, someone outside is crying. I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people are out and about all the time, and it's kind of the middle of the day on a weekend, so I apologize. Anyways, Stephanie worked in internal affairs, where she investigated